let's go back to our Syria story and talk to our guest, Chris Doyle. He's a Middle East analyst and director at the Council for Arab-British Understanding. He joins us from London. Chris, apologies for that glitch in what we were talking about there. Let's talk about Syria. When we look at pictures of Damascus, it looks like a bustling, thriving city. Clearly, it is not. Where is the economy today?
Well, it's an illusion, as you suggest, and Syrians will be going out to vote today, some of them, but not in hordes, because they have no expectation that these parliamentary elections, called as they are now, will change anything. It is this illusion. And what they know is that it will not address the serious crises in Syria that include the economy, the lack of justice and human rights, and that it's more important for them today to find the bread to go on their table, to feed their children, to get electricity and water, all of these things in short supply. And as you said, that we are looking at a country that's seen a doubling in food prices in the last 12 months. The Syrian pound has crashed to record low levels, and every month it's getting worse. Not helped by the coronavirus pandemic and the way, of course, that various measures and restrictions have been put in place to counter that. It's not helped by the crisis in Lebanon as well. But above all, the party responsible for this is the Syrian regime, its chronic mismanagement. We're looking at a situation today of 20 years of the rule under Bashar al-Assad. And perhaps Syria is facing its greatest ever crisis.
That's interesting you talked there, Chris, about economic mismanagement going back 20 years. Is that the kind of the fingerprints on the Syrian economy of Bashar al-Assad anyway, even before what we're looking at in terms of the conflict kicked off 9 years ago?
The roots of all the tensions within Syria are long-term. They're historic. Of course, before Bashar came to power in 2000, there was corruption and mismanagement as well. It was a highly centralized economy. The way in which he liberalized that economy was very much to go put parts of the economy in the hands of very few cronies who still are at the top of the regime. I think what we are seeing at the moment, and we saw it with the whole clash with Rami Makhlouf, is there is a reordering really at the top amongst these cronies that surround the regime. And for Syria watchers, those who really pay deep attention to all of this, they're looking at those who've been allowed to run in these elections. It's a beauty parade, as it were, for the regime's inner circle, who's in, who's out. But for ordinary people around the country, it means nothing. And remember also that most Syrians can't vote in this. You've got 5.5 million refugees, over 6 million internally displaced, people who can't get to polling booths even if they wanted to. So these are such, for the ordinary people, a meaningless exercise.
OK, let's talk about... Pardon me for interrupting you there, Chris. Let's just wrap up our conversation talking about the election itself. You're talking about internally displaced. Of course, there are hundreds of thousands of people who've been displaced outside the country. We're talking about areas that Bashar al-Assad still cannot get to. He needs or he wants to get to them from a military/tactical point of view. It doesn't sound as if this election will conform to any of the norms of a democratic process.
Absolutely not. It's a charade in terms of democracy. And I think what really is striking is, of course, if a country is normally faced with a crisis like Syria is right now, you need a process to get the best and the brightest to be discussing and debating the strategies necessary to, correct what's gone on. Of course, these elections don't do that at all. There is no public debate about how to deal with the pandemic, how to deal with the economic crisis, how to recover from 9 years of war. It's simply not there. This is just a mirage. And I think that's a great problem, because if you are faced with this disaster, you really need to tap into every source and input of expertise possible. So, yes, but for the regime, and I think it's important, it does matter. They are going to be trying to say this is business as usual. Far more of the country is now able to vote than in 2016, when the last parliamentary elections took place, because the regime has regained control of more areas. So we're only really seeing now Idlib in the northwest, where these elections can't take place. Of course, there'll be representatives assigned to Idlib, but it won't be genuine or have any credibility, legitimacy. So, but for the regime, it's another step back to saying we're in control, we count, and the opposition is finished. It offers nothing to Syria. It means really that the crisis will continue. We may well see further protests because, frankly, people have very little to live for right at the moment, and I don't think the regime can sustain this level of economic crisis without further protests, riots, even against its rule.
OK, we must leave it there. Chris Doyle there in London. Good to get your analysis here on the Newshour. Many thanks.